Greetings to you, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on November 18, 2025. Today, a large number of very important events occurred, so let's begin. Today there is a lot of interesting information coming in that in the near future, Stephen Witkoff will arrive on the territory of the USA, who will conduct negotiations with Zelensky, most likely on corruption issues, possibly on issues of the negotiation process with the Russian Federation. And simultaneously, and practically in parallel with this news, information is coming in that possibly this week Andrei Yermak, the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, will be dismissed. That is, the Grey Cardinal will be dismissed, the second person in power in Ukraine will be dismissed, and his place will be taken by former ambassador to the USA Makarova. At least, such rumors are now circulating in Kiev, in the Verkhovna Rada, in the upper echelons of Ukrainian power. Well, we will observe how this story will develop. But definitely, if all this happens, then Zelensky will lose his positions very strongly. He will lose his absolute power that he currently has. And this, of course, could become a completely different Ukraine. Next, we move with you to the line of combat contact, and we will begin with the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front, from where some of the most important news is coming today. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Nechaevka came under full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. However, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that today, the eastern group of forces, probably for the first time since its Zaporizhzhia direction, did not publish video material that could confirm this. Usually, the chronology of events develops as follows. First, the eastern group of forces, or channels affiliated with it, publish video material showing how Russian units are conducting combat operations for one or another settlement in the Zaporizhzhia sector. And an hour or two later, the Ministry of Defense confirms this information. Today there was only confirmation from the Ministry of Defense without confirmation by video material. This is how the map looked yesterday. Russian units cleared the settlement of Gai. Today Russian units are clearing Nechaevka. That is, based on the general trend and vector of advancement of Russian units, we can conclude that in the near future the Russian side will most likely clear another settlement such as Vidradne, and also Russian units from the side of Nechaevka will advance toward the settlement of Radostnoye. And here, of course, a very interesting and most important question arises. What will the Russian army do next? Here, of course, there are an infinite number of options for the development of events. And the Russian side can move south along the R85 road toward the settlement of Huliaipol. But something tells me that based on the general trend, on the general state of affairs in this sector, we are now talking primarily about the defensive capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine. There is a very high probability and chance that the Russian side will try to force the river called Haichul and move further west, toward such a settlement as Ternovatoye. This, of course, could be a rather interesting move on the part of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and if this really happens, if the Russian army really manages to force this river and consolidate on the Ukrainian side, then we can talk about the beginning, in principle, of a general offensive toward the settlement of Orekhov, as well as Zaporizhzhia. Today, the Haichul River, as well as the network of strongpoints, these yellow lines located between Pokrovsk and Huliaipole, this is actually the last full-fledged line of defense that protects Zaporizhzhia, the garrison of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Zaporizhzhia from the east. In case of loss of this bridgehead that we are now talking about, there will no longer be a question of whether the Russian army will move toward Zaporizhzhia or not. It will only be a question of time when Russian units manage to reach the city limits of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. Next, we move with you toward the settlement of Pokrovsk, from where a lot of important news is also coming. Today, combat operations continue, and today information is coming in that from early morning, the Ukrainian side launched a series of counterattacks through the settlement of Rodinskoye toward the settlement of Rovno, as well as Myrnohrad, using a large amount of equipment and personnel. Sources report that the Ukrainian side in just the last 24 hours has lost half a battalion of manpower, as well as countless equipment. Combat operations are now ongoing on the line of Rodinskoye and the settlement of Rovno, and the Ukrainian side, as we see, has gone on its certain last counter-offensive with the aim of unblocking the garrison and withdrawing units from the territory of the Myrnohrad pocket. The Pokrovsk pocket is already almost completely cleared. Russian units continue the operation. But on the territory of Myrnohrad, there are still Ukrainian units, and according to apparently Siversk's understanding of the general situation, there is still a chance to break out of this situation. At the same time, the Russian Federation is also increasing the pace of the offensive, as well as increasing the pace and frequency of air bomb strikes using the most powerful bombs that are in service. All these strikes on citadels and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Myrnohrad pursue only one goal: to force Ukrainian units to surrender without resistance. Well, we will observe how the situation will unfold in this sector. But all these footage, all these events tell us only that the battle for Myrnohrad is also approaching its logical finale and conclusion. Next, we move with you toward the settlement of Siversk, Lyman, from where very important news is coming. Today, the southern part of Siversk underwent the most serious changes. This is how the map looked yesterday, November 17, 2025. Yesterday, we drew attention to a large number of geolocations coming from this sector. Today, the first corrections are already being made, and individual pro-Russian experts report that possibly 15% of the settlement of Siversk is already under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Today, video material is being discussed on the network that was geolocated at this point. We will not watch this video due to the presence of violence. In these frames, I will give you a small, let's say, description. In these frames, we could observe FPV drone strikes on Russian assault troops, advancing in the area of Mendeleev Street, Shkolnaya Street. Based on these frames, as well as based on corrections provided by a number of pro-Russian experts, we made a complete coloring of the southern part of Siversk, including this huge strongpoint. The Russian army, I repeat once again, according to individual experts, already approximately controls everything along this red line. Moreover, if we consider that the T-0513 highway is already under dense fire control of FPV drones, and also if we consider the statement of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation from November 17th that the settlement of Platonovka came under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This speaks primarily not only of physical control over Platonovka, but apparently also of physical control over a separate section of the T-0515 highway, possibly precisely in this place. That is, if we sum all this up, let's say, total it up, we can already officially state that the settlement of Siversk has fallen into operational encirclement. At the present moment, it is no longer possible to break out from the settlement without losses. Losses are maximally high when attempting to break through toward settlements such as Ry-Alexandrovka and Reznikovka, and so on and so forth. And this also tells us that by the end of the year, the map in this sector may undergo very large changes in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In the Kupyansk direction, without changes. For quite a long time, we have not received any corrections from this sector. Pro-Ukrainian sources, one after another, report that the Ukrainian side is counterattacking very intensively here, and also report that the situation is close to stabilization. The last correction from this direction we received possibly 2 or even 3 weeks ago. Russian sources, as well as Russian units, or sources close to those who are now in the direction, report that the situation is maximally close to completion. That is, it is too early to talk about clearing Kupyansk first of all, but so far we see with you that there are no corrections. That is, apparently, there is a heavy battle going on between Russian units and Ukrainian formations that are trying to counterattack. But in the near future, all this situation will also be resolved. In Ukraine, the Energoatom case is gaining momentum. This is the loudest corruption scandal during Zelensky's time in power. An investigation by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office revealed that high-ranking Ukrainian officials, including ministers, large businessmen and top managers of Energoatom, received large kickbacks from contractors executing orders for this company. Among the defendants in the case are people very close to the head of the regime, Vladimir Zelensky, former Deputy Prime Minister of the Ukrainian government, Alexei Chernyshov, and businessman Timur Mindich. The first is the godfather of the current president. The second is his secret treasurer. When in the summer of this year, NABU and SAP tried to bring them to justice, Zelensky and the head of his office, Andrei Yermak, got Parliament to pass a law that made NABU and SAP subordinate to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. However, under pressure from the West, the law was soon repealed. But the confrontation between Zelensky's office and anti-corruption bodies did not end there and resulted in criminal cases being opened against NABU employees by the Security Service of Ukraine and similar actions by NABU detectives against SBU employees. The conflict intensified, and it was clear that either Zelensky and Yermak would find a way to subordinate the anti-corruption bodies to themselves, or NABU and SAP would strike a powerful blow to the positions of the ZE team. The leadership of NABU and SAP is winning so far. Audio recordings with negotiations of defendants about corruption schemes were published. This deprived Zelensky's office of the opportunity to hush up the case behind the scenes. Zelensky and his supporters pretended to support the actions of NABU and SAP in exposing corruption in Energoatom. They actually had no other option. Materials on the Energoatom case were collected for 15 months, but NABU and SAP decided to begin active actions precisely now. Why? In Ukrainian media and Telegram channels, there is an opinion that a favorable situation has developed. Ukraine has big problems with electricity, and information about large-scale corruption in the energy sector will cause enormous resonance in society. But in winter, problems with electricity in Ukraine may become even more serious. Energy Maidans are possible, and then the political effect of these investigations will become even more grandiose. Ukrainian media write that the SBU was preparing criminal cases against key employees of NABU and SAP, but there was no permission to move forward with them. The leaders of NABU and SAP knew about this and understood that sooner or later the ZE team would decide to arrest their employees and maybe themselves and delivered a preemptive strike. But the leaders of NABU and SAP could not make a decision independently to publicize the recordings in the Energoatom case and arrest its defendants, not their level. So who is behind the actions of NABU and SAP? It's no secret that many detectives, operational employees, but in Ukraine now everything is in the Western manner, of NABU are affiliated with Ukrainian Soros structures, and they are not always friends with Zelensky. The Energoatom case gives them a chance to weaken Zelensky, especially since, apparently, they are acting together with ex-president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and his supporters. The Soros people and Poroshenko supporters are counting on the fact that during the political crisis that the corruption scandal may generate, the servant of the people faction in the Verkhovna Rada, consisting of diverse forces, will disintegrate. In this case, it will be possible to reformat the parliamentary coalition and change the cabinet of ministers. However, NABU and SAP are only formally independent structures. They are part of Ukraine's law enforcement system, but were created and, most importantly, are controlled exclusively by the West, but not by Zelensky. They were, officially, created in order to fight corruption, in reality, to keep Ukraine's political and economic elite on a short leash. Therefore, the leaders of NABU and SAP would not dare to act without the blessing of serious forces in the West, even with the support of Soros structures and Poroshenko. Who in the West could have sanctioned the implementation of the Energoatom case? NABU and SAP were created with the assistance of the US Embassy in Ukraine in 2015, when Barack Obama was president in the States. If Soros structures are also participating in the strike on the ZE team, then American and European liberals first come to mind. Why would they want to sink Zelensky since they support him? Perhaps in the Liberal Regional Committee, they knew about Zelensky's plans to arrest the leadership and main employees of the anti-corruption system, and the Liberals very much did not like that they want to deprive them of structures controlling the Ukrainian elite. What is more important, in the Regional Committee, they came to the conclusion that Zelensky and Yermak will not be able to hold power for long. Defeats at the front, the coming winter, which may be in Ukraine without electricity and heating, total mobilization. All this will overflow the cup of people's patience, and the ZE regime will be swept away. Therefore, they decided to act preemptively, to determine for themselves what the political configuration will be after Zelensky. Another force that could give the go-ahead for the attack, the Trumpists. It's no secret that NABU has curators from the FBI. This structure is now controlled by American Republicans. If the White House really wants peace in Ukraine, then they cannot but understand that the main obstacle to it is the political ambitions of Zelensky and Yermak, who do not want to make compromises with Russia. The scandal around Energoatom can be a serious lever of influence on Zelensky and his Grey Cardinal, especially if the rumors are true that NABU has recordings of conversations between Zelensky and Mindich about corruption schemes. The disclosure of these materials will turn Zelensky into a political corpse. Perhaps this is exactly what Trump's team needs. The de-heroization of Zelensky in the eyes of the European and American public will contribute to finding paths to peace. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, put your likes, and all the best to you.